Let's catch up with Liberal Senator for New South Wales, Concetta Fierravanti-Wells. Good to speak to you again, Connie. Scott Morrison's giving the big press club speech tomorrow. The focus is on how we get out of this coronavirus shutdown. Is there any chance that he's going to spend any of that $60 billion in debt that he now doesn't need for the JOBKEEPER program?
Look, that you'll just have to wait to see what the Prime Minister says tomorrow. Look, I think what is important here, there are two issues really, Chris. One is, of course, that many people are hurting at the moment, and it's going to be incumbent on us to make sure that the cure is not worse than the disease, because I think that with a lot of people hurting out there, what we don't want is a situation where we have successfully dealt with health issues, but of course our economy is in dire straits. And it makes me think, of course, that don't forget Winston Churchill, he won the war, but he lost the election. And what we don't want to see is a circumstance where those people who are hurting, who will inevitably either lose their businesses or not be able to get their jobs back, have permanently lost their health or any other reason, will naturally find someone to blame. It's human nature, Chris. But in principle, and blame the government, and of course blame the Prime Minister. And that's something that we have to be very, very careful of. And then, of course, there's the other component about what we do with communist China and the regime.
Well, hang on, I'll come to that in a moment, don't worry. But while we're on the $60 billion, though, I mean, the principle is that those policies are in place that are adequate to get people through. We're doing better than we expected. It would be opportunistic to then go and dip into that $60 billion to actually increase the debt more than it needs to be increased to get through this thing.
Chris, only the Labor Party would want us to incur more debt. I mean, let's not forget 6 years of fiscal vandalism and how long it took us to pay off the debt that the Labor Party left us, and we had to pay that back during the Howard years. Look, there has been a technical problem. Some businesses didn't fill forms in properly. The reality is that all the people that needed to get a job, the job payment, got the payment, and therefore nobody who needs it will be disadvantaged as a consequence of this. We're going to help 3.5 million people. And I think that I'm sure that there will be programs that will be set out. But of course, the Labor Party want us to incur more debt. I think that we've got enough debt to pay back, enough debt that our children and our grandchildren will have to pay back without incurring any more.
All right, on to China, and we've seen protests in the streets of Hong Kong again today. They were broken up by tear gas and the like. Protesters in Hong Kong against the new laws that's going to be imposed by Beijing to take away more autonomy from the people of Hong Kong, to make them exposed to laws of sedition and the like. Australia and other countries have joined in a diplomatic protest against these laws. What, in reality, though, can we do to stop the eventual complete recolonisation, if you like, of the Hong Kong system?
Chris, we're seeing the communist regime doing what it does normally, and that is to not comply with international law, not comply with obligations. I mean, there were clear obligations under the Sino-UK treaty that led to this position. Hong Kong was to have been left as it was, things unchanged for 50 years, but clearly that is not the intention of the communist regime. And it's very clear from what we've seen recently at the Congress that's been held in China at the moment that there is this clear plan, and the clear plan is to incorporate Hong Kong into China and disregard the one country, two systems that had been the basis of the framework. Obviously, what we're seeing in Hong Kong, what we're seeing in the South China Sea, what we're now starting to see in other areas. For example, there are reports now of trouble on the Indian-China border. This is typical behaviour of the communist regime. It disregards international law. It is not acting as a good international citizen. And most especially, I think what's happening, Chris, is that we are seeing that under cover of the pandemic and with the world distracted dealing with the coronavirus that came out of China, China is taking the opportunity to continue enforcing its illegal claims, most especially in the South China Sea.
But when it comes to Hong Kong, we can protest all we like. There's nothing much the international community can do. It belongs to Beijing. They'll destroy the very economic foundation of Hong Kong if they make it the same as mainland China, but the world can't really stop it.
Well, that's the reality, Chris. And until you have a situation where the bully or somebody takes on the bully and the bully is brought to task, then they will continue to do what they have been doing, because when it suits the communist regime in Beijing, then they utilise and weaponise international treaties, obligations, entities. When it doesn't suit them...
Just very briefly, sorry, Connie, we're nearly out of time. Donald Trump has raised the prospect of sanctions against China. Should Australia get involved in that?
Well, I think that we should be looking at all options in relation to the communist regime. And that's the reason why, Chris, going back to your first question, I think post-pandemic, from a domestic perspective, I think we also have to look at, it's not going to be business as usual with the communist regime after the pandemic is over. And that's the reason why I've been pushing for plans, not just to decouple from China and reduce our dependency, but also look at how potentially we can gain some compensation for the billions of dollars that the Australian taxpayers have had to borrow.
That's a whole other issue. Thanks so much for joining us, Senator.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks very much. Senator